It's Tuesday, July 21st, and the time for your Barbados Today morning news update. An undisclosed number of passengers are now in mandatory quarantine as contact tracing continues following the positive COVID-19 case from Saturday's British Airways flight. According to Health and Wellness Minister Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic, persons sitting near the 76-year-old passenger who tested positive for the virus will be tested again at a later date while at the Harrison's Point isolation facility. He, however, could not definitively say how many had been isolated or how long the quarantine period would last. The minister spoke with BT's Karim Smith.
Contact tracing is done regardless, but remember that these people are people who would have been awaiting test results. So they have not gone into the community or home or either the airport or the crane. So it's from there straight to Harrison Point. So really and truly the contact tracing would, for the most part, be the seats on the plane. Depending on who was sitting, there's a protocol for that on plane. So depending on where you were seated, you would be considered to be a close contact. But those persons would not have left the areas that they were awaiting the test.
And that would be the persons who were around him, you're saying? They were also tested on arrival and would have been awaiting their results today?
No results would have been yesterday. They would all have tested negative, but they would be in quarantine for a period and then tested again because the incubation period would not. If the person came on board and they were positive, then the ones who were sitting next to them would not necessarily test positive immediately. Right. So those persons would normally be in quarantine, and then they will be tested.
The People's Party for Democracy and Development says government needs to revamp its protocols for persons entering the country. And while spokesman on tourism and the economy, Scott Weatherhead, is in agreement with the reopening of the country's borders, he is not on board with the procedure that every traveler must take a 72-hour test prior to travel. He suggested that the COVID-19 tests should be taken 24 hours before traveling to Barbados, and for all arriving passengers to be retested and quarantined for 14 days.
The way the virus is in the world today is not any better than it was when we locked down. It's actually worse. So in other words, things haven't improved more now in our source markets virally than they were at the time we took a decision that we were going to lock down the country. They haven't improved. They're actually worse. So it's just the government has made a decision, we can't stay closed, we need to open our economy. But yet they're opening it with a protocol that's less than when they first closed. Because when we first decided that we were locking down, everyone coming through that airport was quarantined for 14 days. In a government facility, everyone, and they were tested. And at that time, the load of the virus in the world was much lower than it is now. Now they have reopened, where there's far greater percentage of people sick in various source markets than there were when we were locked down and enforcing a quarantine. And now we're not enforcing any quarantine. We're doing a little test in the airport or 3 days before flight and off you go. That is foolishness.
Yes, it is.
It is absolute foolishness. And so while I agree that we do need to open our tourism market, absolutely. And we need to get employment in our tourism industry. Absolutely, it's important. We cannot do it at the risk of citizens' lives.
Some recipients of government's Trust Loan Fund may be given more time to repay their loans. Word of this from Minister of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, Dwight Sutherland. Addressing the first in a series of customer service, debt and money management workshops yesterday, the minister disclosed that businesses were struggling to cope and were being forced to adjust to the new COVID-19 environment. This is said led to the suspension of loan payments and extensions, among other measures.
Back in April, they offered a 3-month moratorium on payments in the first instance. So payments were suspended between April and June 2020. They went further to that. They also further extended the credit terms on the additional loan amount. So some clients required a longer payment period than originally stated in the contract. and they would have extended the loan payment period, and the monthly payment amount became smaller for those clients. Refinancing of existing loans. The trust law went further to that, to top up some of the loan for the customers so that they can get stock in some areas of health and safety and security systems and in agriculture, because those were the businesses that were operating, and the trust loan topped up those accounts. I want to thank you all again for that initiative. And I don't think they are finishers yet, because the COVID period is not over. And speaking to the general manager, he signaled to me that he will speak to his chairman and indeed seek to extend further moratorium for some of the businesses that are struggling.
Plans to better safeguard vendors at the Berinda Cox Fisheries Complex are underway. Officials had given an undertaking to erect barriers to ensure the safety of fisherfolk after 74-year-old Rita Sisi Hunt lost her life in a freak accident when a vehicle plowed into the market last month. Minister of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy Cook Humphrey said the work should be completed by next Friday.
I've spoken to some of these vendors. They tell me that they're very happy with the work that's being done so far. We will continue to upgrade the market. We're hoping that by next Friday all of the work is done, and we're hoping that when we're done, we're going to paint the barriers so people can see that the barriers are in place. But I want to ask Barbadians when they enter in these markets or any other public place, also with a great degree of care and concern for the fact that people actually work in these markets. And I'm still very much in tears and torn over the loss of Sissy, who would have lost her life here. But we're doing this to make sure that those who are here will be safe as we go forward. This market has a very strong history, and perhaps the center of oysters, and we want to make sure that the people who work here are recognized for the important role that they play in the blue economy. So that's why we're doing this work. As I said before, it's being beautifully done, it's strong, it's going to be aesthetically appealing as well. And persons then have a sense of pride to come to work in the market. So not only that, I just want to thank MTW for all the effort. I want to thank the vendors as well for their patience and for their understanding in this matter.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
Totally unacceptable. That's how the Rastafari community in St. Lucia has described Sunday's arson attack on the Roman Catholic Church. As we hear in this report from HTS News Force, the community, in condemning the attack, has also distanced itself from the incident.
In no way and no form we support such developments at the place of worship. Everybody have a right to worship according to how they choose.
That was President of the Ionola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari, Aaron Alexander, denouncing the arson attack on a Catholic church in Vieux Fort on Sunday, July 18th. The fiery assault was all too familiar for the faith-based organization, as it evoked unpleasant memories of the deadly cathedral massacre during the New Year's Eve Mass in 2000. Francis Philip and Kim John, now serving life sentences at Bodily, clubbed and set worshippers alight. 2 people died and 13 others were wounded. Recently, a viral video sent chills throughout the Catholic community, with a young man accusing the church of satanic worship. However, he retracted the comments after widespread condemnation and calls for his arrest for issuing threats.
We as a Rastafari community, we are celebrating the 128th birthday anniversary of Haile Selassie on Thursday, which is the 23rd of July, and we will have our celebrations in our tabernacle. How would we feel if somebody would invade our tabernacle and cause such havoc in our place of worship? totally unacceptable. So what we don't like for ourselves, we will not do it unto others.
The president of ICA warns against jumping to conclusions by labeling someone a Rastafarian because of their hairstyle.
So whenever people see these things happen and a man with locks or a woman with locks perpetuates such acts, they will be quick to say it's Rastafari. But people have to be cognizant of the fact that right now dreadlocks is a style.
And finally, on the international scene, President Donald Trump has threatened to send more federal law enforcement officers to major U.S. cities to control ongoing protests. We get more in this report from Reuters TV.
After violent weekend clashes between anti-racism demonstrators and federal agents in Portland, Oregon,
we're sending law enforcement.
President Donald Trump on Monday told reporters that he plans to send more federal law enforcement agents to some major U.S. cities where protests have flared, noting the cities' mayors are Democrats.
Well, I'm going to do something that I can tell you, because we're not going to let New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, Detroit and Baltimore and all of these. Oakland is a mess. We're not going to let this happen in our country. All run by liberal Democrats.
More federal law enforcement to some of these cities?
More federal law enforcement, that I can tell you.
Federal officers last week began cracking down on Portland protests against police brutality and systematic racism, with unidentified officers in camouflage using tear gas to disperse crowds and using unmarked cars to take some activists into custody without explanation. About 1,500 demonstrators gathered Sunday night outside the federal courthouse, including a group of mothers dressed in yellow shirts, linking arms with other protesters.
That's news. But for the very latest, visit us at www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, or like us on Facebook, and sign up for our breaking news alerts via WhatsApp. We're also on Izumi Media in bus terminals, as well as screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. And you can also hear us on Mix 96.9 FM and Capital Media HD 99.3 FM.